Hello, everybody. My name's Jason, and I'm in recovery from the disease of alcoholism, addiction, substance abuse disorder. There are a number of names for it, but essentially, drugs, prescribed illegal, alcohol, and other things, my mind and body react um, in an unfavorable way. And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about um, what it was like, what happened to me, and through recovery, um, how my life is today. So, thank you for listening, and I hope you find something to connect with my story. I was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania in 1968. I'm 51 years old. I grew up in a wonderful family. My father was the oldest of eight. My mother had an older brother. All four of my grandparents worked hard. My grandfather spent 42 years with the Pennsylvania State Game Commission. My grandmother's worked. My grandfather worked for Sears, Roebuck for years on my dad's side, and also had a hardware store called Lloyd's Hardware in Huntington, Pennsylvania. So my life early on was wonderful. We had a lot of aunts and uncles. My father started a business in Lancaster in the late 60s. It started to grow and become successful. And so, being the oldest, he needed help. And he felt that family he could trust. So, my uncle Dave, my Aunt Sarah, my Uncle Al, they all eventually relocated to Lancaster and helped my father and mother grow their business. So, I grew up in an economically, we were middle class. I had everything I needed and wanted. My parents brought me up right, and I did well. I did like any most people in school. Um, if you read my the history, and I'll share a little bit with it, but if you really got into detail with, from being born until I was 32 years old, um, you wouldn't have guessed that at 51 I'd be sharing my story about my struggles with alcoholism, with addiction, and all that I went through, and how the disease changed me. And the good news is there's hope. And in my personal experience, and in my experience with thousands of other men and women in recovery, I've run into so many people that have seemed to conquer this hopeless state of mind and body, as we call it. So, my like I said, my high school years were great. The first time I tried alcohol was when I was 16 years old. I went to the mountains with our high school football and wrestling star and his best friend, and it was peer pressure. We were at the cabin, we were going fishing, and they were drinking some beer, and they gave me one, and it was peer pressure. So, I wanted to be cool. I was always somebody that, and you'll see this come about. One of my character defects, and I believe it's a symptom of the disease, is I was always worried about what you felt. I was always concerned about how you looked at me, because I really never felt comfortable with who I was. I could put on a face, and I could, be successful. I could be that person that I wanted you to think I was, but I was a chameleon, because no matter who I was hanging out with, I wanted you to like me, and therefore I would act in that way. So, um, peer pressure was the reason I had tried my first beer. but I didn't drink a lot. And, in high school, I was an athlete. I was all-state wrestler. I was an all-county football player. I was on the tennis team, and I needed to be at a high performance level. And as I share my story in the future, if something got in the way of one of my goals, or if I felt that um, I was crossing a line where I would be thought less of, I wouldn't do it until the disease um, escalated to a point where I crossed that line. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So, high school, I would drink here and there with my friends, but I think it was just once again peer pressure, having fun. I went to college in Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh. My grades were decent. I got by with a B average. I did what I had to do, and I go to college in Pittsburgh, and of course, I'm 17. I went young. I'm 17 years old, and I'm in a big city. I grew up in Amish country, rural Pennsylvania. So I'm in the city of Pittsburgh, and of course, I wanted to experiment with things. I'm away from my family, my parents, and I don't have anybody to keep an eye on me. And my experience in college, once again, looking back, I could see signs of my alcoholism starting, but at that point in time, nobody in my family or myself would have said anything. I was in a fraternity. I was active in the fraternity. I was getting good grades. I was, athletically involved at Pitt. And so, once again, at that point in time, I was there to accomplish a goal, and I wasn't going to cross a line. I did drink heavy, but it was, what we did. I do recall a couple of my fraternity brothers would get out of hand or get real drunk or pass out, but that wasn't me. The only time that I had blacked out in my life really was at college, my 21st birthday, the night of my 21st birthday. And um, that was because my fraternity had a tradition that you had to start drinking at 9 a.m. and a brother would come by the local fraternity bar that we had, and you had to do a shot once an hour. So once again, I didn't have the symptoms. Um, Graduated from college, got a great job with Household Finance Corporation. Um, Drank on the weekends, no drugs. Oh, I'll step back. There was something that's very important in my story. My sophomore year in college, I was in a dormitory, and my roommate one came in and he said, "Hey, have you ever tried cocaine?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Oh, I got some. Somebody gave me some." And I tried one line of cocaine, and all I remember from that experience was, um, we played ping pong for like 2 hours straight. We were very competitive, but I remembered it felt good. And I remember saying to myself, I know cocaine's bad. I know there are consequences, and I know I'm not going to do it because it could get in the way of my goals, my career goals. But someday, that little seed was planted that felt good, and someday, you know, I'll try it again. It triggered an explosion in my mind. But anyway, I graduated from college, got a job, like I said, and I drank on the weekends. So for me, in my experience, there was no signs of alcoholism or addiction. Um, what started happening? I guess at that point, I always I always had this goal, but I seemed to never be satisfied. Like I said earlier, that I didn't feel right in my own skin. I wasn't sure what my identity was. I was moving it around to appease you and those around me. Um, I was selfish and self-seeking. So a lot of times, my relationships were based on um, how can you help me accomplish my goals? I mean, you're either in the way or you can help me. And I began to seek a solution to make me feel better. And what I found is I would set these goals that I thought, I'll be satisfied. So I got the job and I was happy. I got a job out of college. I had money. I bought a new car. And I remember, after about 6 months at that job, you know, I wasn't happy. It didn't satisfy me. So I need to do something else. I'm going to get a new car. So I get a new car and now I was happy. That wore off. Then it was I need to get my boss's job. I need a promotion. I was always seeking something to make me feel better, and I found it, but it only lasted so long. And then I returned to that, uh, I would guess, spiritual state of, or unspiritual state of unhappiness, restlessness, irritability, and I would seek something else. I got married, I transferred jobs, I traveled all over the country, kept getting promotions, bought a house. I was good then. I'm good now. I can stay here for as long. Now, got to do this. I got married, had children. They were wonderful. My wife, now my ex-wife, she didn't drink much, and I didn't drink much. It wasn't until when I turned 32, there were some events that happened in my life. Now, what causes the disease of alcoholism, or what causes us to cross that line? Um, when I went to my first treatment center, I had reasons. I lost a daughter. If you had to bury your daughter, then you would drink like I drank. My first company uh, went under. We had to file bankruptcy. And if you had to go through that, then, you would go out and party like I did. My marriage failed. And so I had all these reasons of why I drank and why I would do drugs, recreational drugs at night, um, marijuana, cocaine. And so, I always had an excuse. And, I'm not sure if any of us know what causes the disease. I can tell you from a hereditary standpoint, my mother's in recovery. Her father was in recovery. In fact, all three of us went to the same treatment center. My grandfather in the 70s, it was called Chit Chat. My mother in the 80s, Karen Foundation, and then me in 2012. My second rehab. I went to where my grandfather and my mother went. But if you look at that side of the family and my father's side, there was a lot of alcoholism. And so was it hereditary? Were it the circumstances I dealt with in my life? I don't know. What I've learned is it doesn't matter. My analogy is cancer. If I get cancer, it could have been if I was a smoker, if I was a drinker, if it was hereditary. Doesn't matter. I have it and I need a solution. And that's how I feel about alcoholism, the disease, is once we get it, or we have consequences, it really doesn't matter. The fact is we have it. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and through Alcoholics Anonymous in our literature, it does talk about how we're able to, through Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps and meetings, we're now able to identify individuals who may have symptoms of the disease, but one never knows. That's something that the individual has to determine if their life is unmanageable and powerless. So anyway, going back to my story, I got divorced. I lost the business. We lost my daughter, Olivia, and I moved back home with my mom and dad. I left my wife and the kids have the house. And of course, I'm freed up and I start going out. And I'm going out to play darts. I'm going out to shoot pool. But I played for a dart league, and the guys on my dart league, we would drink and we would play darts. And one night, guy laid out some cocaine, and I did a line, and boom, it was that same feeling. I was like, I remembered I would do this again. This is like that feeling in college. And that was something that we started to do after a big dart league game. So maybe, once a week, I started to change my thinking. I started to think, well, I can't wait till dart night. I can't wait till dart night. And when I started playing darts, I had this anticipation. At that point in time, I had a desire, an obsession was growing. And, soon enough, I started to do it with people that were on my team, but throughout the week somewhere else. And then, I crossed that line and I never thought I'd cross. One day, I couldn't get a hold of anybody. There was nothing going on. And I had that obsession to use, cocaine at the time. Drinking, my drinking was picking up, but morally I thought, hey, it's okay to drink. I only blacked out once. I've never had a DUI. I've never been thrown into jail. So, drinking's not my problem. And, but I got to watch this cocaine thing and I'm never going to buy it. And of course, I crossed that line. And, you know, I should have. This disease is cunning, baffling, and powerful. I remember, buying cocaine and said, I'm going to do one line. The first time I ever bought it, I lived in an apartment. I was separated now. I had moved out from my parents' house. I was in the mortgage business, and I said to myself, I'm just going to use this one time, one line. And I did that line and I literally like put the cocaine away in my shelf like I would if I decided to take a Crown and Coke whiskey and, put the bottle away. And that bottle would stay up there. And, the next time I had guests over or next Friday, I would, drink it again. And I had that mentality. But essentially what happened is I kept going back that night and back that night. And the next thing it's daytime and I used it all. First time I ever bought it. Like right there should have been a sign. But this disease tells me, no, it's okay. Um, that's just that's an experience in life. And just the next time, don't do that and be careful. And I'm not going to do it. But that started to escalate. I started to hang out with other people that I was drawn to those people because this obsession to get what I wanted. And backing up a little bit, at this point in time, when I lost the business and I lost my daughter at that 32, I had accomplished a lot of things in my life. I'd accomplished a lot of things that I thought would make me good. Cars, bigger houses, um, vacations. When we were married, we did what we wanted. My career was in full swing. Country club membership because I liked to golf, helping family. Um, it never satisfied me, no matter what it was. Um, I even thought, okay, another relationship. When I got divorced, it was her fault. And it was, I need to find a better relationship. So I was always looking for something. But when I ran into drugs and alcohol, that was something that always worked. Like for me, that was my solution. It didn't wean out, like it worked. I thought, I had found it. I had arrived to something in life that every time I did it, it worked. It kept me from um, those thoughts. It made me feel good. I was excited, energetic. I could accomplish things. I would talk about, all these desires I wanted to do. And it was a very social thing. But what started to happen is as I saw the disease getting out of control, I started to check my morals and I said, people, people are going to think differently of me. And I told you early on that for me, this disease and one of the character defects I still work on is I'm worried about what you think of me. So if that's what I'm worried about, then if you're going to think less of me because I drink too much, then I'm not going to drink a lot around you. If you're going to think less of me because I smoke pot, then I'm not going to smoke pot around you. I'll smoke pot around people that smoke pot and don't think it's, morally wrong. But and then when I started getting into cocaine, um, and experimenting with some other drugs, that's where I couldn't. My friends that drank and people at work and my family, no, they're going to look at me differently. In fact, I went to my first rehab uh, for 30 days, telling everybody there that I had a cocaine problem and an alcohol problem, and never mentioned once that I was smoking crack because even the people in treatment would look at me less. Coke is, I always had, there were always standards. Like, the alcoholic isn't as bad as the cocaine addict. It isn't as bad as the crack addict. That isn't as bad as the intravenous heroin user. You know, that's that's how I thought. When in reality, they all do the same thing um, when we get addicted to them. The same symptoms, the same behaviors. They're all the same. Whether you're an intravenous heroin user, a sex addict, a gambling addict, we start to lie, we start to cheat, we start to hide, we start to withdraw. It's a process that there are so many common factors. But anyway, I like I said, I started to actually smoke crack, and to me, that was just like I got a problem. So it took me a while to realize that, basically rock bottom, and I went to my first treatment center. The the first treatment center, all I remember coming out of that treatment center was uh, I need to go to meetings. I figured anybody that does cocaine or crack gets addicted to it. I don't ever want to do it again. If you gave me a lie detector test, it would have came up positive or came up that I was telling the truth. I don't ever want to do this again. I don't know how to stop, but I'm going to go to rehab. I'm going to stop. I thought rehab would work. 38 days, I get it out of my system. I mentally get away from it and I'm good. And I think somebody that doesn't have the disease of alcoholism um, would be good. They would be good at that point. But for me, there was never a sufficient enough consequence that would keep me from stopping. Um, Rehab alone, and what I felt was, at the time, everybody now knows, and I'm less of a man because I went to rehab. Um, I never want to do that again. I want to come back strong, and I want to get back to where I was, and we're just going to call that a blip in life. And so I got out of that first treatment center and I went to meetings. And being an overachiever, they said 90 and 90. I'm sure they told me to get a sponsor. I'm sure they told me to do the 12 steps. Sure they told me to read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous or go to Narcotics Anonymous or whatever it was, try a recovery house. But the only thing that I got out of it was go to meetings. So that's what I did. And they said 90 and 90. So what I did is I went to 90 meetings in 90 days. I I got a job back, a couple 3 or 4 weeks after treatment. I had a good resume, and I conveniently found an AA meeting on my way to work. I talked to my boss, and my job was 8 to 5, and I said, "Can I come in at 8:30?" And he said, "Sure." And I went to a 7 a.m. meeting every day on my way to work, 7 to 8, and I did that for 90 days. Stayed sober. I did that for 180 days. I said, I'm going to do 180 and 180. I'm going to do 360 and 360. And I actually went to an AA meeting every single day, except Sunday. They didn't have it Sunday. And I stayed sober. But one thing didn't change. And that was how I felt. I started to return to those same feelings of what's it all about? Nothing's good enough. I would achieve something again and not be satisfied. I didn't have a solution. And when you don't have a solution, or in my experience, when I didn't have a solution, there was always one that I knew worked. I can't do it, but I knew it worked. And sure enough, I remember dating a girl. I went to Delaware, 15 months sober, and I took her out to dinner and we sat down at the table. Now I have 15 months now, never going to do it again. And all that time, AA, rebuilding my life. And we sit down, and the waiter comes up and he asks her, "What would you like to drink?" And she says, "I would like a Miller Lite." And right there, it was probably only 3 or 4 seconds, but what went through my head is, oh, she's drinking. I can't drink. because if I drink, I start doing drugs. And I don't ever want to get back to that again. But if I don't drink, she's going to wonder why I don't drink. And then am I going to tell her I'm in recovery and I'm an alcoholic? But then she's going to think less of me and she's not going to date me again. And, it's been 15 months and cocaine was my problem, not alcohol. And by the time he got to me in that 5 seconds, my mind convinced me to say, I'll have one too. And I started drinking again. I didn't go back to Alcoholics Anonymous the next day. I figured I can't lie to them. I'm good. And that was it. But what happened is I started to drink and not do drugs. And that lasted maybe 6 or 7 times when I went out. And anyway, I remember my family and friends. I went out with a couple of my buddies, and I ordered a beer, and they're like, "Oh, I thought you didn't drink." And I said, "But cocaine was my problem." Yeah, that is right. You weren't that bad when you drank. They even reinforced it because they didn't understand recovery. Anyway, I started using again, and I can't, with the disease I have, once I start drinking and then using drugs, an obsession kicks in my mind, and that's all I think about, and I can't stop. And so, real quick, I went down that rabbit hole, and I had to go into my second treatment center. In my second treatment center, I learned something different because, hey, why didn't it work the first time? And so what I heard the second treatment center is it's not just meetings. Meeting makers don't make it. Going to meetings and not doing the work is like going to the gym every day for an hour and a half and just sitting there watching people lift weights. You're not going to get any better. You're not going to get bigger and more fit. You got to do the work. In fact, if you get a trainer, AKA sponsor, and that trainer tells you what work to do, and you do that work every single day to say what that trainer tells you to do, and you do that for 6 months, you're going to get the results. I've seen it. It's proven. But I didn't. But when I got out this second time, I said, okay, I believe that. I got a sponsor, and I started to go through the steps. The problem is I went through them half-heartedly. I didn't take all my sponsor's suggestions. And, I believe I got to my 4th step and I quit calling my sponsor and, slowed down on my meetings. And next thing you know, I'm drinking and I'm using again. And this time it got really bad because I thought, now I got a sponsor, I'm going to meetings and I'm doing the steps and I still can't stay sober. I'm one of those hopeless cases. Like nothing can cure me. If that can't cure me, nothing can cure me. And I went on it was a 6-month period in my life, 44 years old, that I crossed so many lines. I was lending out my car to drug dealers. I was hiding from my family. I was in my basement thinking the FBI was coming. I wasn't able to function. I was at a bottom that was so low for me that I didn't even want to get help because I never thought about killing myself, but I did lay in bed saying to myself, what would happen if my family comes over tomorrow and finds me dead? Like that's where I got to. And so it took my mom from not answering the phone that got me to my 3rd and final treatment center. I try to tell parents, I had owned a number of recovery houses and I stay involved in recovery and, I work with people and help them out. And over again, I have the mother, or the father saying, what do we do? What do we do? In my experience, it's not enabling. It's, that tough love, detachment. If you go to the Al-Anon website, there's a great definition on detachment. I share it with every parent going through what they're going through. And a lot of them get relief from that and learn from that. But I was at the very wit's end and I called my best friend and he didn't pick up. And he always picks up his phone. He's an IT guy. And at that point, I'm like, he's not even picking up. He knows where I'm at. And I called my mother. Now, my mother, I could be a serial killer and they could show me doing the murder. And my mother's the type of person that would be in court still defending me. Like, someone doctored with that video. That's not my son. And so I knew that I had her, the last person on the face of the earth, and I called her. Now, nobody had heard from me in over a week. They knew I wasn't dead, but they didn't know what state I was in. And I called my mother, and it rang, and it rang. And I knew, I could see it right there, that she was on the couch crying, rocking, and seeing on the caller ID that her son's calling, and that relief that he's alive. But she had learned through Al-Anon, do not pick up that phone. Do not put a pillow bottom. Let him make that choice. It could be he dies, but he needs to want to get help himself. And when I got her voicemail, I broke down, I cried, and I was like, I'm all alone. This disease has got me to the point where even my mother won't help me anymore. And at that point in time, I called my third and final treatment center, and I went in. I had to drive over to my sister's house, and her fiance, drove me to treatment. And that last time, I came back, and I was willing to do whatever it took. At that point, I was done being this wild Mustang in life and wanting all these things. I was like, I'll be a trail horse. Just, take me to little kid parties, put a little kid on my back, and pull me around the path with a rope the rest of my life. Like, I'll do that. I just want to hold my daughter's hands. I was visualizing one of my daughters in a field with flowers. It's like, and just spend time with her. Like, that's all I want out of life. None of that other stuff mattered. I don't ever. And so, I took suggestion, and I took almost all of them. Most of us don't take every single one, but I took almost all of them. I did what they told me to do. The first two treatment centers told me to go to a recovery house. Nah, I'm not that bad. I don't need to do that. This time, it was suggested I go to a recovery house. Sure, I was like my pride and ego, I'm a businessman. I was a senior vice president for a bank before I went into this last rehab. And now you want me to go to a recovery house? Well, I didn't have anything. I didn't have anywhere to go. My mom was like, no, you're on your own. My family was like that. So I took suggestion, and I went to the recovery house, and it was there that I found freedom. It was there that I found God. It was there that I found the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. There were people in there, like I said, NA, AA, there's Cocaine's Anonymous. There's all kinds of different recovery programs. The on-ramps to the road to recovery, there are many on-ramps. But it was being with others, a group of men that were going through the exact same thing I was going through. They could call me out. They were there. They had experiences they could share with me. We were all doing the right thing. It was positive. It was positive peer pressure. We had 12 guys in the house. If one guy wasn't doing the deal, like, he knew about it. So we all tried to do the deal, and not everybody made it, but I did the deal, and I felt good about it. And I went through those 12 steps, and what an experience. I'm here to tell you, I've been talking a lot about my story and some examples of where the disease took me. But the solution is in those 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous for me. It is taking the suggestions of my sponsor and doing what he told me to do, and writing, an inventory of all those people. Like, I did a lot of work to make amends. And sure, it was hard in the beginning, but like anything else you do, after I started doing my fourth and my fifth, and I kept going, I started to see relief in that. I started to feel good about something. And now there's something I'm doing that's giving me relief the same way that drugs and alcohol did, and these other things did, but they're not negative consequences to it. And, getting on my knees and looking for this higher power. At first it was praying to my dad. I knew he was up there in heaven. I'm like, Dad, look over me. But, through time and soul searching, I found a higher power, and I communicated. I had a conscious contact. I had spiritual experiences. And, that's one thing I found about finding a power greater than myself, is I can go to that power and I can practice those principles that my higher power has: honesty, openness, willingness, forgiveness, tolerance, patience, love. I mean, I'm not perfect with those principles, but I strive to do those, especially when I start falling short, or I start reverting back to my self-will and my selfishness and my self-seeking attitudes and my irritability, like I can go right back to that higher power and reconnect, get forgiveness and focus on that. And so, well, what a great thing, because I've never seen anybody really have any consequences to the highs of a spiritual life. It just keeps on giving without all those consequences. The consequences I experienced with drug addiction, the loss of my kids, the loss of property, the loss of financial, the loss of reputation, going to jail, getting a record, basically losing everything of value in my entire life, my friends, that I lost all that stuff. But through this new solution and this higher power, I get relief, I get joy, I get freedoms. It's beautiful. It's just absolutely beautiful, and it works. And I see people that have so many more years than me, and they have this peace of mind, and they practice the principles. And if you really want to taste that, I really recommend you do the 12 steps. For me, they didn't take that long, and certainly a lot less than 4 years of college. I mean, I went to 4 years of college and read over 100 books to get a little piece of paper to make me a little more money. And here's one book and 12 steps that a sponsor can take you through in 4, 6, 8 months, depending on how, maybe in faster. Some people get it done fast track, whatever you want to put into it. But I wasn't able for 10 years to make that commitment to one book in these 12 steps. But I made a commitment. I spent more time in 1 week of work to make $1,000, 40 hours, than I put in the first 10 years of my sobriety or trying to get sober. And so, highly recommend it. What you put into it, you'll get out of it. And it's, like I said, an amazing experience. I support recovery homes. I've lived in them. Relapse is a part of my story. After that third treatment center, I had some lasting sobriety, but I started to quit doing what the 12 steps told me to do. And so if I quit going to the gym after 4 years, doing it every day and doing what my instructor's telling me, and I quit doing that, I'm still going to look buff and in shape for, weeks, maybe even a month or so after I quit going to the gym. But eventually, I'm going to lose that physical fitness. And same with a diet. If you quit, and if I quit working my spiritual program, I'm going to start losing my spiritual fitness. And that's exactly what happened to me. I did the 12 steps backwards. I quit helping others. I was like, I got this. I quit praying. It started out, I missed the morning, and then I missed the night, and then, life got busy. I quit praying. I got this. I, quit taking an inventory. When I would get into an argument with somebody, I wouldn't forgive, I wouldn't make amends or apologize right away. I kept the resentment, and you're wrong. And, I'm texting you, I can't believe you did that. So that started to come back, and, I started hurting people, and I wasn't fixing relationships, and resentments grew. And I got, to the point where, all these character defects started coming back, and I relapsed. But the one thing I knew is, treatment center, I went to 3 treatment centers, but I only ever gone to one recovery house, and that worked. And I did the 12 steps. So this time I didn't go to a treatment center, but what I did is I went down to Florida. I was in Pennsylvania, and I went to Associate Recovery Communities in Clearwater. I needed to be around those men. I knew that I didn't have the discipline to do this myself, because if I did, I would have just got out of bed and went to AA, got a sponsor in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and, went back, but I couldn't do that. There was no support. My obsession and my lack of discipline kept me from doing that. So, I drove down there and I moved into a recovery community, and it worked. It worked. I got a sponsor. I went to meetings every day. I started to get back into the spiritual gym, started praying, hanging out with guys around me. And it was an even better experience. So if relapse is part of your story, don't worry about it. It's something where we can keep trying and learning from the past, and it gets better. I've had such a better experience when I was in Florida than I did the first time, because I gained some recovery capital. I learned from the first time. I learned what mistakes I made, And recovery is wonderful. It's just, I talked a lot, and I shared part of my story, but I want to end with this. Recovery is amazing. I have so many friends. I have so many people that I love. My Facebook and my phone is almost totally filled with people in recovery anymore. We help one another. We're a fellowship. We forgive each other. People out there, there's so many of us in recovery. A lot of us keep it anonymous, but a lot of us don't, and we get our relationships back. It takes time. Just today, I made connected with one of my daughters that I haven't seen for 12 months because of what this is, what my relapse had done. So maybe even 15 months, but she was the last one, and today we spent time together, and it was awesome. So it does take some time, but the family comes back. My self-esteem came back. You can get your reputation back. Life becomes fulfilling and fun again. It's an amazing thing, and I just believe that if you haven't done it, I, I I recommend you do the steps, do the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, whatever program it is. Do them. Just try it. Go through with it, because you won't know until you do it. But it's just, it's a life. They say it's a life beyond our wildest dreams. There's just nothing better than going to bed at night and just laying down on the bed and going right to sleep and not being in your head and not worrying about who you hurt or who you got to, lie. And it's just, I'm done talking. It's just an amazing experience. So I highly recommend it. Get a sponsor if you're listening to this, and you want to get back on the road to recovery. Follow your sponsor's suggestion, pray, and do what the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous tells you. If you're a family member, a friend, a boss who has somebody in that needs help, highly encourage them to do what I just said, and to do that. And I'll end with this. So many people have said, oh, they'll relapse, and I'll talk to their parents, and I say, they need to come back in the recovery house and they need to go to AA, and they say AA doesn't work. My son's tried that. It hasn't worked. I always ask them, who was their sponsor? Well, what do you mean? Well, you met who was John's sponsor or Carrie's sponsor or whatever? 9 out of 10 of them say, I don't know. Well, it's because they didn't go through the steps. They didn't have a sponsor that they talked to every single day. I introduced my sponsor to my mother because at that point I wanted her to know I'm doing well, and it was something important to me. And she would always check, what does Charlie say, or what does Dave say, and what does Dave think of this? So that's a great question to ask. Did you do all 12 steps? Did you continue to practice them? And if they can't answer that question, then you say, why don't you do the 12 steps? So, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. You can, reach out to me. My name is Jason John Lloyd on Facebook, and I'd be glad to help anybody out there that needs help in any way. Have a good night, and God bless.